Hey, good to see you, stalwarts. Uh, yeah, bone chewers. Is there a word in English for someone who chews bones? There must be some word for that. So we're dry bone chewers. So we're going to begin. Oh, John, good to see you. We're going to begin with some prayers. Try to set the motivation. We've missed a week because my internet was off last week. Excuse me, let me get my a little saliva in my mouth. Sangye chodang soki chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sognam ki rola benche sangye drupa sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit migrating beings. So remember, this is a special. The first two lines, a special Mahayana refuge, in that one is taking it until you're enlightened, not just taking refuge this lifetime, and including in the Sangha the supreme assembly of Arya Bodhisattvas. Sangye chodang soki chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sognam ki drola penche sangye dupa shok. Then offering a short mandala. By offering this ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, and adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, as well as the sun and the moon, visualized as a Buddha realm. Due to this, by offering this, may all migrators enjoy a pure realm. And then requesting our primordial gurus to inspire the speaker today to be able to express what we need to know. O holy and perfect pure Lamas, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be subdued. Idam Guru Radha Mandalakam Niryatayami. Okay, good to see you all. Hi, Don's joined us also. Jennifer's here. Uh, Good to see you. So we're going to begin with a little meditation, and particularly if you can try to integrate in this particular challenging time, um, that what do we do with our minds? The fact that we have a life of leisure and endowment that we're going to think about um, allows us to think about the Dharma and to try to integrate it, to try to use this unprecedented opportunity of so much chaos going on, uh, both socially, but also even weather-wise, um, to be able to integrate that into the path. So sit comfortably, relax your body, relax your mind. Notice your breathing without controlling it, and then hold it with the mental factor mindfulness, augmented with the mental factor introspection or mental spy, even though it's not one of the 51 mental factors, it is still recognized as a mental factor. Try to let go of the continuity of thoughts that were coursing in your mind beforehand. If that mental spine notices that you're multitasking, part of your mind is watching the breathing, but part of it's thinking of other things. Apply the antidote to that, which is to remove your attention from those other tasks and, so to speak, invest that mental energy into being mindful of the breathing alone. Make a mental note of the subtlety of the breathing, which is your object of observation here, just so that you can compare it later to the breathing when we focus instead on the more subtle object of the mental consciousness. Now, if you've had a little success in calming the mind through watching the breathing, shift your attention to your mental consciousness. It may help to remind yourself it's not the eyes, not your eye consciousness. Put a red cross through that. Not the ear consciousness, not the nose, not the tongue or body consciousnesses. May help to think withdrawing your attention to your heart chakra, where the winds that support the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousnesses, they absorb there. Now, just watching your mental consciousness, first of all, by understanding its contents, noticing its contents. And inferring that the contents of the mind, the emotions, the thoughts, the plans, the memories, the fact that they're present indicates that the mind offers no resistance to them. The nature of the mind is clear and knowing. Here, this clarity we're taking to be the conventional clear light nature of the mind, the fact that it offers no resistance to the arisal of mental events, nor to their reabsorption back into the consciousness. This is also what's called the conventional Buddha nature, the developmental Buddha nature, and has significance that we can change, we can become better. It's not as though you meet some high school friend at a reunion and you're exactly the same as you were 30, 40, 50 years ago. Maybe some people are like that. They haven't really changed the basic disposition, their same tendency to attachment or pride or anger or whatever. But if we apply ourselves, we can introduce into our mind wholesome thoughts, wholesome ways of thinking, strategies, and we can eradicate our faulty ways of thinking. So this should bring some joy to you in recognizing this. Wow. The fact that we can recognize this is due to having an auspicious moment, as the Buddha referred to, a life of leisure and endowment. It's rare, difficult to find again opportunity when so many things have come together. We're born at a time when the Buddhist teachings were given. The continuity of those teachings is still understood and practiced. It's communities of like-minded individuals practicing and benefactors of various kinds. Although we may have personal problems and sufferings, they pale in comparison to the unfree states of the hell realms and hungry ghosts, animals. Even the long-life gods, hindered by simply enjoying their concentration. The Buddha mentioned the two great aims that can be accomplished through this life of leisure and endowment, this auspicious moment, to achieve liberation from cyclic existence the goal, actualize the goal of nirvana, never again to be reborn in cyclic existence, experiencing bliss. But the Buddha also said the other great goal of great enlightenment is the one that should be attended to by disciples of intelligence, because it gets us to the great destination of enlightenment directly without having to first pass through nirvana for innumerable eons when we're unavailable to help sentient beings. Although we will be awakened from that self-liberation eventually and will strive for enlightenment. All that period were more or less useless to sentient beings. The goal of enlightenment comes about from the first apprehension of the plight of others, a development of empathy, which is in some circles today is even considered to be a fault. From the Buddhist perspective, to put ourselves in the position of other sentient beings who are suffering like us, to empathize with them, to feel them dear as they've all been kind to us numberless times, depthlessly kind as our mothers, kind even when they're strangers, providing the infrastructure of our lives, our electricity when it works, our food, our roads, and kind even when they've been enemies, because they provide us with an opportunity to ripen the seeds of negative karma on our consciousness here in the human realm in a relatively benign way, rather than ripening later as eons in the lower realms, or much more unbearable suffering. The development of bodhicitta, the mind that wishes to achieve enlightenment for the sake of others, is a necessary condition of achieving enlightenment. In addition, we need to have the collections of wisdom and merit. We have to accumulate those collections that serve as the cooperative conditions to achieve the two bodies. When we speak of the various bodies of the Buddha, we can condense them into two, the Rupakaya and the Dharmakaya. Rupakaya, the form bodies, the emanation body, the Nirmanakaya, and the Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body. Those are both attained for the welfare of others through the accumulation of the collection of merit. And the Dharmakaya, and its two varieties, the wisdom Dharmakaya and the emptiness of that mind, the Svavavikakaya, are achieved through accumulation of the collection of wisdom, which brings about our own aim, the experience of uninterrupted bliss, that blissful mind realizing emptiness while still on the conventional level, knowing and working, knowing the suffering of sentient beings and working to alleviate it. To accumulate these two collections, we need to learn the various processes that bring them about through the teachings of the Buddha, especially in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, which emphasizes the accumulation of wisdom. As explained by Nagarjuna in his Fundamental Wisdom and expounded on by Chandrakirti in his two commentaries to the Fundamental Wisdom, the Prasanapada, and especially here the Madhyamakavatara, entering into the middle way or the supplement to the middle way. They explain in detail these two accumulations of wisdom and merit. And later, Lama Khapa wrote his great commentary, Illuminating the Intention or Illuminating the Intent, Gompa that we're studying. Especially as a commentary to the root verses of the Madhyamakavatara, and also as a commentary to Chandrakirti's auto-commentary. So I think I'm going to participate today, listening, contemplating, meditating, in order, is our motivating factor now. The reason we're entering into this activity is to quickly achieve enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. That's our goal. And as a means to do that, means to achieve that, we're studying this text. I think I'm going to participate in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all mother sentient beings. With that kind of motivation that takes the burden off of ourself of wanting to appear learned or never to have mistakes. Even if we make mistakes, even if we find difficulty understanding, we're doing it for the sake of sentient beings in order to achieve enlightenment so that we can effortlessly, spontaneously, and without error lead sentient beings out of their present state into the state of enlightenment eventually. Okay. Okay, good to see you. So, I see Megan Frey. Megan, have you been here before? It must have been. I've forgotten. Where are you located? Can you unmute? There you go.
Hi, sorry, there might be an echo. Hang tight. I'm actually right here with Carl too. I'm from Long Island, New York. This is my first time here. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Okay, so both of you there. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So Long Island, Long Island.
Long Island, yep.
We're joking about the pronunciation of the Long Islanders. Okay, so good to see you. Yeah, I just wanted to mention in particular, as I had mentioned at the very beginning, the unprecedented opportunity we have right now with so many things going on that could cause our minds to become, you know, chaotic, and which is the sign of the onset of delusions, of afflictions, because the afflictions, one of their characteristics is they cause the mind to lose its calm and its clarity, like the horses running through of a band of soldiers, the horses running through a calm riverbed, calm before they ran through, but the water becomes churned up and the mud comes up from the bottom. And so that we're faced with sometimes afflictions. Maybe we get angry and we feel we have to strike out, or we feel terror and we feel afraid and so forth. So, as the Kadampa Geshes mentioned, it's opportunities, it's situations like this that offer us the opportunity to actually calm our mind. What can we do in a time like this? Uh, we should practice the training of the mind, the Lojong. Um, if you have a chance to read the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, that would be a great thing to read at this time. Every day, read some pages of it, or in a more modest way, a condensation of that, the eight verses of training the mind, which I find doable. I can't recite the Bodhisattva Charyavatara or read it every day. I don't have the time, but I can easily go through the eight verses of training the mind that bring about, eight important points of the training of the mind. One of which is to paraphrase it, the fourth point. When we encounter beings of bad character who are gripped by suffering or obsessed with, evil, with bad deeds, I will try to understand that. I will understand that as an unprecedented opportunity. The Tibetan verses say, like finding a rare treasure. I remember when I've mentioned this before, maybe even in previous weeks, when I was at Kopan originally as a monk, and sort of encountering, in everyday life, the fact that you can think about life in a different way rather than just feeling upset about the various, suffering situations and chaotic situations. You can use it to train your mind. The two, always alternating between conventional bodhicitta, I should say with the right hand here, and ultimate bodhicitta, the realization of emptiness. Sometimes the situation is, ripe for you to enhance your understanding of and development of bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, developing your compassion, seeing the suffering and understanding the suffering that individuals that are creating chaos will experience in the future. Sometimes the situation is more amenable to developing ultimate bodhicitta, realizing emptiness. And sometimes we have to alternate between the two during the day. When I said one thing you can do is to read the Bodhisattva Charyavatara and meditate on it, or more conservatively, the eight verses of training the mind, for instance, or other short Lojong texts. Gomotuku was one of my teachers, and whose reincarnation is now already a young Lama. He wrote a commentary on the eight verses of training the mind, and in his preface and in conversation with him, he explained that it was at a time when his own life was very chaotic. He had given back his ordination. He was living, I think, in Dalhousie, and mind sort of unhappy, blaming people and other things for his plight. and he went to see his guru, Khepji Trijang Rinpoche, and Khepji Trijang Rinpoche said, this is a great opportunity. You could meditate on the 8 verses of training the mind. But yeah, maybe for you who are learned, write a commentary on it. So that's the origin of that commentary, which I think Venerable Joan, who was the author of one of our translations of the Gompa Robsel, she translated into English with some supplementary commentary by Geshe Jamba Gyatso at Institute of Lama Tsongkhapa many years ago. So you can find that commentary by Goma Tuku. Sort of has some special taste because he wrote it not as penance necessarily, but in order to use that opportunity of the upheaval in his life to use that to bring that into the path. Okay, so I wanted to share that. Okay, so how are we doing? Anyone have any questions they'd like to ask before we begin the actual class? Mikhail, yeah.
Yeah, a small dharma each about the inappropriate conceptions, attentions. Are they pervaded by the 4 wrong conceptions? Seeing impermanent as permanent, seeing impure as pure, and so on.
So to remind others what Mikhail is referring to, the inappropriate attention, Sushin Mayimba, what is it, Duce?
Yiche.
Yiche. Sushin Mayimba means inappropriate, not in the right manner. Not in the right manner. And Yiche is attention. So generally when we pay attention to what is occurring, let's say what we see or hear or whatever, our mind can just pay attention to that in an appropriate way from the Buddhist perspective. That is to see it as illusory, the appearances that occur, see those illusory appearances as the result of our karma, whether it be virtuous karma or negative karma. Sometimes you're attending to things that seem attractive, pleasant, a pleasant day or things going right. Sometimes things going wrong or reading the news. And if you don't pay attention in the right way, but instead leave open the door to developing the afflictions by inappropriately attending to them. So Mikhail is asking about the various ways that you could, whether all of the inappropriate attention is pervaded by the usual 4 faults of attention like that. That is that perceiving things that are actually impermanent and attending to them as though they were permanent. So that, it's finding them intolerable because they in your own mind, you're still holding them to be permanent. Attending to things that are actually the nature of suffering and imagining them to be pleasant. That is like the happy feelings of this lifetime, really attending to them and feeling some kind of gratification that they are really good, whereas they're actually the nature of suffering, contaminated suffering, even though they appear to be pleasant and so forth. So these 4 kinds of faults, seeing that which is which has parts as being partless, and seeing that which is selfless and holding it to be a self. I'm not sure if those are the only ones, Mikhail, to make. I just wanted to explain that even the answer to your question is very short. just to explain it, first of all, I'm not sure that those are the only ways that you can inattentively perceive things, but those are the major ones. Can you think of some other inattentive perceptions? Not inattentive perceptions, inappropriate attention?
Yeah, I'm guessing yes, that there should be other ways of seeing wrongly things, but yeah, in reading Geshe Sopa, it looks like he was saying that these inappropriate attentions were the four. So I was wondering if there were only those four, or maybe other ones. I'm not sure.
So yeah, you could think of the various tenets that we study, the various, if you were to hold those tenets as correct, that would be the lower tenets that are not concordant with, let's say, the Prasangika view. If you were to hold those as correct, I think that would be an inappropriate attention. And in that regard, I just wanted to mention in the very excellent lectures that Jay Garfield has just finished at Shantideva Center. I recommend very highly if you have a chance to watch them and pay attention to them. One of the things I felt a little bit uneasy with was he was saying that the various tenets, let's say like the Svatantrika compared to the Prasangika, was not like an alternative, but it was another way of enhancing the view of that. Actually, there are competitive views. There are people who hold the Svatantrika and would deprecate the Prasangika view, or hold the Chittamatra view and deprecate the Prasangika view, and so forth. So those would be, holding those views that are not correct you could say would be kind of a form of inappropriate attention. Does that make sense, Mikhail? Okay, good. Okay, anyone else have you have a follow-up? Mikhail, were you?
Oh, thank you.
Anyone else have? Anna, was that a sign you have a question?
Thank you, Venerable George. No, I was just taking it all in and writing, and maybe just throwing my arms up, taking a break from writing.
Okay. Nadine? Okay.
Jennifer has a question.
Maybe, George, I can also keep it for discussion group, maybe.
Okay. So Jennifer does have a question, though. Yeah.
Thank you, Venerable George. I was listening to the recording from a couple of weeks ago, and there was a question that came around, and the factors of a moment of the conditions that allow a moment of consciousness to arise.
Right.
I think you had mentioned the referent condition, like, you see a blue object, and then
Right.
you have the immediately preceding moment of consciousness, and then you have the empowering condition, like the sense faculty, the ability, the sense faculty, such
Right.
as the eye or the eye sense power. So I guess my question, though, is when I think about it like that, it seems like, there's the object, and then, that simultaneously allows me to have that moment of consciousness. But then you also noted that, the moment of blue arises because of the moment of consciousness that precedes it. So I was just trying to get my head around, how those three factors can lead to a moment of consciousness, but how that relates to like the temporal aspect that you mentioned as well.
Right. So the Chittamatra school says that they are simultaneous. The perception of blue, the perception of the blue object and the consciousness that's perceiving it, they are simultaneous. But the other schools most of the other say Buddhist schools, other than the Svatantrika that is following the Chittamatra, the Yogacara, in a very specific way, most of them would say that is not possible, that consciousness always arises as a result of its referent condition. Let's say like the blue flower out there. And so it always occurs, the immediate successive moment. Any moment of consciousness is always the result of the previously immediate preceding moment of the existence of that object. So when we notice seeing blue, what we're actually seeing is the blue that existed one thought instant before that. So that's more or less what you're asking, right?
I think so. So then basically, so when we go back to the three conditions for consciousness arising, basically those three happen, but when we have an experience of that moment, it's actually the subsequent moment. Like, are the referent, immediately preceding, and empowering condition happening at the same time? But then that package is then being apprehended in the following moment.
So if we talk about just one instant of consciousness, it's so that that consciousness has arisen because of those three, among other things, those three conditions, right? So the that moment of consciousness is a result of the referent condition of the previous moment. There will be, if there's a continuity of watching the blue flower, there will be a existence of the blue flower at the time you're seeing blue, but the blue that exists at the time you're seeing blue, won't be perceived until the very next moment, right? So indeed, they are, from the perspective of the result of those three conditions, the referent condition, let's say the object that you're perceiving, will be of a previous moment. That there can be a continuity of that. There could be a referent, the blue existing still, but that won't be perceived until the next moment.
Thank you. And sorry, this is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so that the referent condition is the previous moment, but also the empowering condition must be simultaneous with the previous moment as well, right? Because you couldn't have
Right.
just an object without its empowering condition.
Right. So
Okay.
the immediately preceding condition was immediately preceding. So that is of a moment of consciousness that is also of the past. And the empowering condition, yeah. So what about that? Is that the empowering condition of the present time, or the empowering condition of the immediately preceding moment? I'll leave that for you to think about. Okay. Yeah. Because when you say the immediately preceding condition, that's one of the three conditions, that's obviously preceding again. Okay. Good question. Okay. Yeah. So where are we? Today we are going to start in theory with the section rebutting objections against our refutation, which is found in Thupten Jinpa's edition on page 349, and in Venerable Jones' translation of the FPMT translation of 198. I'm reading correctly, yeah. But I wanted to just remind us of what we were so this is rebutting objections against our refutation. So that means we must have just given our refutation. So that came back, there was the approach of refuting that was presented in Chandrakirti's own text, and then the approach presented in another text, meaning the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. So I just wanted to remind you of that. So that was the example of the hibernating bear, right? That is bitten by a mouse that has some poisonous substance on its teeth or its fangs or whatever. And so that when it bites the hibernating bear, let's say maybe it's not completely fully asleep yet. It just about to go to sleep in hibernation. It bites that, and the bear notices that it has been bitten. Darn it! But it doesn't realize that it has been suffused with poison yet, because the poison, takes some time to activate. Whereas later when the hibernation is almost over in the springtime, when the spring showers come and the thunder sounds in the sky, and the bear is awakened from their hibernation, and they experience that the pain, when they're asleep. Is that your experience also if you've like I was bitten 2 weeks ago by a wasp. I was stung. I have to. I was corrected. I wasn't bitten. I was stung by a wasp, and I didn't know. I noticed the sting, but I didn't notice the swelling immediately. It was only later that my arm started to swell up and my wrist and so forth. So it was something similar. If you're in sleep, sometimes if you're or about to go to sleep, if I had gone to sleep at that time, without feeling the swelling and the heat in my arm and the pain and so forth, when I awoke, I would have that experience. So when the bear arises from that hibernation, they not only remember being stung or bitten, let's say, by the mouse, but they also remember that must have been when the poison was injected into their bodies. So with regard to this, I wanted to share with you a PDF, and I wonder if Doris, if you could place that up on the page there. So this is about 7 pages from Jose Cabezon's translation of the Tongtung, the dose of emptiness, or thousands of emptinesses. You can translate it in different ways. Usually many Tibetans take it as to mean a dose of emptiness. That's how Jose translated it. So this is the section, very, very useful, because this brings together a lot of the points that we're talking about. And we'll go over it on Monday again in more detail. But right now, just to read some of the beginning. So this is starting on page 349, the explanation of how we posit our own system, which does not accept autocognition or rangrik or self-awareness or reflexive awareness. So this is how we posit memory as occurring, how the Prasangika posits it. So this is more or less covering these 2 sections that we've just gone over, but let's just read a little bit of this here. So it begins by saying, the opponent says, even the Acharya Chandrakirti accepts that form a merely nominal point of view. No, from. So my eyes are dyslexics here. Even the Acharya Chandrakirti accepts that from a merely nominal point of view, it means conventional point of view, there is such a thing as autocognition, the subjective aspect experiencing itself. Is that right? Does Chandrakirti accept that conventionally? Richard says no. Does anyone say yes? Paul, does Chandrakirti accept that Rangrik exists conventionally?
That I don't remember. That doesn't sound right, but
No.
He doesn't.
I don't know.
Generally, Lama Tsongkhapa's position, and I mean, you could read Chandrakirti in different ways, but Lama Tsongkhapa's position is that Chandrakirti doesn't accept Rangrik existing at all, either ultimately or conventionally. So,
But he, but he does accept that there is a mental factor of self-reflection, like shishin.
yeah, so the introspection, the mental factor introspection is something that it occurs in the mind that is watching the mind, but following on to Jennifer's question, it's always observing a previous instant of mind, the immediately preceding instant of mind. It's never perceiving the consciousness at that moment, which would be one of the characteristics of self-knowing or reflexive awareness. Reflexive awareness from the Chittamatra point of view is something that takes the aspect of an apprehender. That means that it is watching the subjective side of the mind rather than the consciousness itself, the main consciousness, which is an other knower, which is knowing the outer object. Let's say knowing the blue, the self-knower, according to Chittamatra, is part of that, one entity with that, but it is focusing instead on the consciousness itself rather than its object. Okay, so the reply to this opponent's erroneous, statement that Chandrakirti accepts it relatively, he says, this claim flies directly in the face of instances in the Madhyamakavatara Bhashya. That means the auto commentary that Chandrakirti wrote to his Karikas, in which Chandrakirti says that though auto condition does not exist even nominally, memory can still arise. So there it's stated quite unambiguously, excuse me, that Chandrakirti says that autocognition, which is reflexive awareness, self-knowing, all of these different ways of translating the same thing, does not exist even nominally. But that doesn't mean that you can't have memory. Still, memory can arise. So this section is about how the Prasangika says, even without autocognition, which is the main, cause for the Chittamatra of why we remember. Even without that, you can have memory. For example, after refuting the existence of any form of autocognition, of reflexive awareness, and memory that exists by virtue of their own characteristic, after refuting inherently existent Rangrik and memory and so forth, Chandrakirti says, and he's quoting from the point of view of the Chittamatra, but from the point of view of worldly parlance, Chikten Gitanye, even according to that, the reply is, even according to that, it is impossible for memory to possess autocognition as its cause. So when we talk about worldly parlance, the tanye at the end of that Chikten Gitanye is another synonym for conventional truth. We talk about conventional truth, relative truth, or this kind of conversational truth. So, and also, I will show in this way how memory arises without autocognition. This is what Chandrakirti had said there. So then it continues, well, how does memory arise in our own system, in our Prasangika system, if there's no autocognition, even nominally? Let me take the meaning of what is extensively taught in the Madhyamakavatara root text, the Karikas, and in its auto-commentary, the Bhashya, and put it in a somewhat more easily understandable form. So some of you may not see, it's just like that when we talk about the prasanapada being clearly worded. Some of you say it's not clearly worded to me. This may not seem more understandable, but he's put it as a syllogism. So he says the subject indefinite. Actually, I think it says in the actual Tibetan text, it says what does it say? Sheja Chuchen. So take the subject object of knowledge. He just Jose just says indefinite. So this is setting out a syllogism. The subject, all objects of knowledge. The predicate, which is the second point, even though the subjective appearance that is internally directed and devoid of dualistic appearances does not experience itself, there is nonetheless a reason for why a memory arises that thinks, I have previously seen this blue lotus. So you could truncate that and say, you could just to the latter part, saying, even without Rangrik, there is a reason why memory arises that thinks, I have previously seen this blue lotus. And the reason is three parts here. One, the eye consciousness that previously perceived the blue lotus and the later memory of it are not inherently different. So why is it talking about memory? Because it will become clear here as we continue in maybe discussion Monday and next week that the memory is still arises, but the memory of seeing the blue flower is that which actually establishes the existence of the perception of the blue flower. But this coming later. So the first part of the reason was because eye consciousness that previously perceived the blue lotus and the later memory of it are not inherently different. If they were inherently different, they would have no relationship at all. You wouldn't necessarily remember something that happened previously. Number two, second part of the reason, one can, by seeing, and I've put in there, I don't know if in your version, you can see the word with, by seeing with one's own eye consciousness, due to seeing with one's own consciousness, you can say, I see. And three, due to the fact that both the object seen by the previous eye consciousness and the object remembered by the memory are the same object, such a memory arises. Okay, that may not be very satisfying yet. Yeah. So let's just read a little bit further and we'll continue on this on Monday. This perfectly establishes it. That sort of goes with that previous paragraph. Then the glorious Shantideva explains it in a like manner in the Bodhisattva-charyavatara. He says, first citing the opponent's position, if autocognition did not exist, how could consciousness remember? So what is this? This is verse 23, right? In the wisdom chapter of the Bodhisattva-charyavatara. Jose, in his notes to this section, calls it verse 24, but I think his numbering is different. For instance, in the two contemporary translations, there are many translations of the Bodhisattva-charyavatara, but two that I particularly depend on. One by Steve Batchelor. In that, he's talking about verse 23. In Jose's notes, he calls it verse 24. In this version, it says, if self-cognition did not exist, how would we be able to have a memory of consciousness? Meaning, how could we remember? How could consciousness remember? So he gives the answer that the privation is uncertain. What does that mean? Anyone?
I assume that's Makya, correct, George? The
No,
privation is not established, or
Khapa
Khapa.
yeah, is uncertain. So that means just because you don't have Rangrik, you don't have autocognition, you don't have reflexive awareness, there's no pervasion that you wouldn't remember. As you can remember by other means. That's the point of that. He gives the answer that the privation is uncertain. That is, just because there is memory does not imply that there must be autocognition, because we can have memory by this special, by the actual method that the Prasangika accepts through the teachings of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and so forth. And so that is as follows. Even though there is no autocognition that experiences the subject, remember, autocognition, reflexive awareness, is supposedly, from the Chittamatra point of view, a consciousness that's knowing that you are perceiving. It's knowing the perceiver. It's a zinnam. It has the aspect of an apprehender. Even though there's no autocognition that experiences the subject, literally that which possesses the object. Subject means the consciousness itself, the subjective mind. There does not occur the fault that it is incorrect for memory of that subject to arise. We can still have memory of this subjective experience. How? When a memory of form arises, when you remember seeing blue, for instance, that memory does not occur at the expense of the subject. And the various, I think both Venerable Joan and Thupten Jinpa translated this term here, Yulchen Pangne. Pangne, they translated it in different ways. Here I like Jose's translation here, Pangne, at the expense of the subject. That is, at the expense of losing memory of the consciousness that apprehended the form. For both the object and the subject are remembered in an associated way, as when we say, I have seen this form before. So this is sort of the gist of the Prasangika argument. When you remember seeing blue, you will also remember that you were seeing blue. When you remember the blue, you will also remember that you saw the blue, because those two are associated. They're related. The Tibetan right above that I've put in there says, Yulchen Delwar Dempa Chiro, because of remembering in a the Yul, the object, and the subject, the Yulchen, in a associated way, as Jose translates that. When at a later time we remember the object and subject in an associated way, this related way, it does not necessarily follow that the subject need have been experienced when previously the object was experienced. Right? When the object was experienced previously, when you saw the blue, you were not necessarily cognizant that you were, like Rangrik would be knowing that you were experiencing, that you were seeing the blue. And so this gets into the example of the hibernating bear. When at a later time we remember the object and subject in an associated way, it does not necessarily follow that the subject need have been experienced when previously the object was experienced. For example, if a mouse bites a hibernating bear, usually the text doesn't doesn't say hibernating bear, but everyone understands it that way through oral tradition. During the wintertime, although the poison of the mouse abides within the body of the bear, at that time he experiences the bite but does not experience the poison, right? This is what we were just talking about before. At a later time, when the bear hears the sound of thunder and awakens from his hibernation, again, parenthetically added there, there arises a memory that thinks, previously, when I was bitten, poison must have entered my body. Yeah. So that construction must have entered my body. I checked the Tibetan there. It says, Duk Shukbar Duk. What does that mean, John? You know Tibetan, right? Duk, see the different spelling. The first Duk has no apostrophe before it, right?
Yeah,
That's the word for poison.
right.
And the last Duk has an apostrophe for it. That's the spelling for what?
So that's I don't remember the linguistic term for that, but that's an existence verb.
Yeah.
So it is that the poison entered.
Yeah. So Jose translated, must have entered my body. So it is, right. So that's another way of saying it. It is the fact that the poison entered the body. Therefore, even though the poison was not experienced when it previously entered the body, later the memory of the bite elicits the memory that poison must have entered. Again, the Duk. Likewise, even though the object possessor, the subjective mind, may not have been experienced. So this is the way that you relate that example of the hibernating bear experiencing or remembering the poison later. So similarly, where was it? Likewise, even though the object possessor, the mind, may not have been experienced when this object was previously experienced. When you saw the blue, you weren't necessarily experiencing seeing the blue. Later on, it nonetheless is possible for the memory of the object to elicit the memory of the object possessor, or in other words, that is of the consciousness that had earlier perceived the object. This is what Shantideva himself accepts. And he continues in the Bodhisattva Charya. I'll just read this verse. From its relationship to the experience of what is other, which means the object, due to the experience of knowing the blue, for instance, the object possessor, the subject mind that knows that, comes to be remembered like the poison of the mouse. So that's the famous verse from the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. So if you're interested, continue reading that, because this gives in very, very detailed way the Prasangika position on how we remember, which is different than people usually understand. So I'll leave that there. Okay, so this was just a review of what we finished last time, the approach presented in another text, which meant the approach of Shantideva and the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. Okay, are we all together? Making sense? Yeah, Doris.
Could you repeat the Tibetan for uncertain pervasion?
Khapa Manye.
Okay, thank you.
Nye, so that's the NGES.
Yes.
Nyeba can mean ascertain, which has the word certain in it, right? Ascertain. It can mean certainty, like for instance, or definite, being definite. Say, for instance, the time of death is nyeba, is definite, is certain. That's the word ngeba. It has different kind of meanings. John, before you, Jeremy has his hand up. Yeah, Jeremy.
Just a small problem I'm having with this analogy, and I might be torturing it, but it seems that the bear realizing that he was injected with poison, he or she, seems to be an inference rather than a memory, like with your example of the wasp bite.
Right.
So rather than being a memory, it seems to be an inference based on the evidence.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Okay, who said that? Yes, John, okay. That was John was thinking also. So, yeah. So when it says must have, uh, that the verb duk at the end that has the apostrophe for it. So it's au da shebju du ga duk. That verb is a form of definiteness. It's not as though it must have. It definitely did. There is a memory that the poison did enter at that time. So in an analogy here, when you remember the blue, there is, so that's a memory. You, in an associated way, you remember that you also saw the blue. Yeah, can you imagine remembering that you saw blue, but not that you saw that blue before, but not knowing, being uncertain of whether you actually saw it. The two are related. The fact that you can remember the blue is related to the fact that you saw the blue before. Okay. a little bit complicated here. So now we're going to begin here, rebutting objections against our refutation. So these two refutations, one from the Buddha, from the Madhyamaka by Chandrakirti, one refutation that the example that was given by Shantideva. So this has two parts: rebutting objections concerning other direct perceptions in inferential cognition, and rebutting objections concerning other cognitions. What is that talking about? So Venerable Joan translated, dispelling arguments regarding other direct valid cognizers and inferential cognizers, and dispelling arguments that there are other mental consciousnesses. So what does it say? So there are going to be objections that the Chittamatra will try to raise against the refutation of Rangrik that Prasangika has presented. Okay, so the first of those parts, rebutting objections concerning other direct perceptions and inferential cognitions. So why is it talking about direct perceptions and inferential cognitions? There are two ways in which we can validly know. Right? What are those two ways? KT, do you remember? Where can we have, in what ways can we have a valid cognition?
And just going right to like the direct perception and then an inferential perception or inferential thoughts, but I'm not sure if that's right.
Right. Yeah, inferential cognition. So generally, things that are manifest, obvious objects that are evident, and this will come up in the succeeding sections here. This word prataksha. Prataksha is, how do we usually translate prataksha? Paul, do you know?
Pratyaksha is either perception or direct perception.
Right.
Depending on
generally, but from the Prasangika point of view, it actually refers to the object, an evident, obvious object. And it's only indirectly applied to the cognition that knows that evident object, and that will be coming up in the succeeding sections here. So let's read what Thupten Jinpa's translation has for this section. So a Madhyamika might ask, proponent of the Madhyamika, we do have to accept in our own Prasangika system that cognitions such as the perception of blue do exist. Yeah, come on. And it is true. And if it is true, if that's true, that we have to accept that there's perception of blue, wouldn't the same objection that we have raised against the Chittamatra, the opponent, when we said, by what means is its existence known? Without observing it, you cannot say it exists. That's referring to verse 672 that came several verses before, and in our commentary way before, because there's been commentary on those verses. So this was saying, this was criticizing the Chittamatra. How do you know that that consciousness exists? Without observing it, without observing the consciousness, you cannot say that it exists. Wouldn't that apply to us as well? Okay, to get the actual meaning, you have to think about it a bit. Jinpa's translation says, because if that perception of blue is known through itself, remember we're talking about the fact that you can remember not only the blue object, but in an associated way, you can remember that you saw the blue object. For if that perception of blue, the knowing of the blue, is known through itself, we will have to admit reflexive awareness. And yet that is known by some, if that is known, and yet it is known by some separate cognition remains untenable. And yet, I see. And yet that it is known by some separate cognition remains untenable. So it's not correct to say it is known by a separate cognition. Following? Megan, are you following? What do you think?
Certainly trying my best. Special thanks to Sean for keeping me up to date on what pages we're on. Really, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. So the reply, this raises an extremely challenging point. So in various, in Jose's translation of Kedrupche's Dose of Emptiness that we were just reading that section, it also says the same thing. This is an extremely difficult point, so let me explain. So here it says, this raises an extremely challenging point, so let me explain. Yeah, so I'm going to just read a little bit further, and then I'm going to go back and read some commentary by Geshe Zopa that just will make it, just sort of pull things together. So this raises an extremely challenging point. So let me explain. So how can the Prasangika say that it doesn't have the same faults that we were attributing to the Chittamatra when we talked about Rangrik and so forth? And it's difficult, so let me explain. It might be easier to understand. The actual text says that it is easier to understand if I explain by citing the example of how we remember objects and our subjective experience of them. Right? So this is what we're talking about. We're remembering the objects and remembering the subjective experience of them. It's owing to the simple fact of remembering the object that we recall its subjective experience as well. Right? That's exactly what we've been talking about. No separate independent recollection of the subjective experience is necessary. You don't need a Rangrik, or you don't need another consciousness that's looking at it from outside. Just the the fact that you remember seeing blue induces the memory of seeing the blue. Likewise, the simple fact of establishing the object of perception of blue, you establish that that exists. For example, that affirms the cognizing subject that perceives that blue thing as well. So this is in answer to who had asked that question? I can't remember. John had also had. Can't remember who had asked that. Okay, anyway, we just talked about that a minute ago. Likewise, the simple fact of establishing the object of a perception of blue, that means proving that it existed. For example, that affirms the cognizing subject that perceives that blue thing as well. Okay, thus, apart from the means by which the object blue is established, how is the object blue established? It says, apart from the means by which the object blue is established, that's established because we saw blue, let's say with our eye consciousness. There's no separate means needed to establish the cognizing subject perceiving that blue thing. It's just saying the same thing again. And continuing, that it is the appearance of an aspect, a likeness, projected upon the perception by the blue object that establishes the existence of this blue thing. On this point, our view is no different from those of other Buddhist schools. So other Buddhist schools also, other than the Chittamatra here, that are accepting this, other Buddhist schools say that it is due to the fact that looking at the blue thing, it casts an image on our retina and on the subtle substance within that, the eye organ. What does it say? That it is the appearance of an aspect, a likeness, projected on the perception by the blue object. So the blue object, as a result of looking at it, the photons come, and there is an aspect of that, a likeness of the blue flower that is projected on our sense organ, and therefore it says here projected onto the perception, because the perception takes place, the consciousness takes place because of those coming together of those three conditions, one of which is the empowering condition, the organ. So from that point of view, that's the same as all of the other Buddhist traditions. They say that there is the consciousness arises because of a similarity of the object arising in our consciousness. Here is where the difference lies. So he's going to say, that part we agree with other schools, but the Prasangika differs from them in the following way. The other schools maintain that the cognition perceiving blue is established by means of reflexive awareness. Almost all of them. The Vaibhashika following scripture don't accept autocognition. The Chittamatra doesn't accept, and some Svatantrikas don't accept autocognition, but the other schools generally maintain that the cognition perceiving blue is established, is proved by means of reflexive awareness, the self-knowing. Remember, the thing that's knowing that you are perceiving. A bare subjective aspect devoid of dualistic perception. So Jimpa translates a bare subjective aspect. Actually, the Tibetan is one of the phrases that I had highlighted in the Tibetan in Jose's PDF, Yangawa. Remember what Yangawa means? As Geshe Zopa explained, it meant one of the characteristics of reflexive awareness is that it is alone. It is, or Jimpa says, bare. In other words, it doesn't have a retinue of mental factors. Usually, all consciousnesses that are aware, that are proper consciousnesses, let's say primary consciousnesses, have a retinue of mental factors. Or if you're talking about one of the mental factors, it's always associated with a primary mind. But the primary consciousness of reflexive awareness, according to Chittamatra, is one that is Yangawa. It is without a retinue. It is isolated like that. Or as Jimpa translates here, bare. The other schools maintain that the cognition perceiving blue is established by means of a reflexive awareness, a bare or isolated subjective aspect devoid of dualistic perception. So for them, Rangrik does not have a perception of its object and its own experiencing of that object as being different. It is non-dualistic. Something they assert is true for all other cognitive states as well. We, on the other hand, we Prasanghikas, on the other hand, agree with Bhavaviveka's essence of the middle way, Umaningpo, and with Gyanagarbha's Two Truths and its auto-commentary. So we've referred to that text several times, Gyanagarbha. Here, Geshe, and when I'm reading Geshe Zopa's notes in a moment, Geshe Zopa noted that from this point of view, Bhavaviveka and Gyanagarbha are both considered to be Sautrantika Svatantrikas. So we were having debate about that, whether Gyanagarbha was a Yogacara Svatantrika or what. So he's like Bhavaviveka, he's considered to be, in this context, Sautrantika Svatantrika. So we, on the other hand, agree with Bhavaviveka's essence of the middle way and with Gyanagarbha's Two Truths and its auto-commentary, where it says that such a bare subjective aspect, this isolated subjective aspect, is impossible. They both refute Rangrik. So therefore, cognition is not established by a self-cognizing reflexive awareness. We're agreeing with these Svatantrikas on this point, not with other points, but we're agreeing with Bhavaviveka and Gyanagarbha on this point. Cognition is not established by a self-cognizing awareness. Rather, the establishment of the blue object in itself establishes the perception of blue that took place at the same time. More or less saying the same thing again, right? Don, are you following?
I'm trying.
Oh, okay, that's good. That's good. Can't ask for anything more. Okay. Where are we? It's through remembering the object that its subjective experience is remembered as well, in this related way. Such recollection is not induced by the prior subject having experienced itself in the manner asserted by other schools. That is, it's that recollection that you remember seeing blue is not induced by that subjective mind having been experienced by Rangrik previously. Okay. So let me read a little bit here on that paragraph from what Geshe Zopa said in 2003 in July. I think this was July the 5th in the morning. So Yangawa, this term that Jimpa translated as bear, and then I translated it as sort of isolated. Yangawa means without any kind of secondary consciousness. It is alone, single. You can say alone, lonely. All shenriks. What are shenriks? What is a shenrik? Paul? John?
Other knower. Other knower.
So the I consciousness self is a knower of something other than itself. It is knower of the blue. Rangrik is called a self-knower because it's supposedly knowing its own entity, which Prasniki says doesn't exist, even conventionally. So Geshe Sopa said, Yangawa means without any kind of secondary consciousness. It is alone, single. All other knowers, all shenriks, have primary consciousnesses and mental factors. They have chitta and chaita. Shenrik, or other knower, has primary I consciousness when you see the blue. There is a primary consciousness and secondary consciousnesses. So for instance, it has the 5 omnipresent mental factors. And it also, if you're recognizing blue, it also has the object ascertaining factors for sure, right? Where are we? These are that's how Shenrik is. Other knowers are, but when holding by Zinpa, then it is not looking outside, but internally. Zinam Yangawa. That's what the Chittamatras talk about. The self-awareness. It is isolated and having the aspect of an apprehender. So, yeah. Louise.
Would you like to take a break soon?
Oh, yeah. Maybe we'll take a break. Let me just read this quickly, and then we'll take a break. So, free of dualistic appearance means that self-awareness that's proposed by the Chittamatra never has dual appearance. What appears to it, I consciousness. So I consciousness is its object that's appearing to it, right? I consciousness seeing blue. What appears, I consciousness which holds blue, then the self-awareness of that I consciousness only sees that I consciousness itself, but there is no object to be known and knower of the object. We say in Tibetan, rikcha rikche. There is no I consciousness being the object and the self-awareness itself being the subject. There's no dualistic appearance to that Rangrik according to the Chittamatra. That's one of its characteristics. That never appears. So ninang dang delwa, dang telwa. Ninang is when the I consciousness looks outside. You always have a dualistic appearance of the I consciousness being one thing and the object that it perceives as being something else. But ninang dang telwa means that you're free of that Rangrik does not have that kind of dualistic appearance. That means the subject, this side, and the object being from that side. So that kind of dual appearance. Rangrik only looks internally, and when whatever you're looking at, whatever object you're looking at, never appears differently. It is the same kind of nature. Okay, so we'll take a break. You can think that this is how we should proceed is stated clearly in Chandrakirti's clear words. So there's a quotation that very difficult to understand. Chimpa's translation tries to make a stab at making it clearer. The classification of valid cognitions or valid cognition is due to the objects of cognition. Means that the enumeration of pramanas, remember valid cognitions. Remember we said earlier there were two kinds, direct perceptions and inferential cognitions. They both can realize and be valid cognitions, is due to the objects of cognition. So direct perceptions perceive evident objects, and inferential cognitions perceive hidden objects. And it is through finding their own characters, through simply assuming the aspect of their objects of cognition, that valid cognitions are defined. Okay, this can be a little bit complicated, so we're going to take a break. Okay, yeah, a nice little break and conversation. Yeah, so we're following so far? What do you think? Okay, so some of you strategically, like KT strategically is far away from the camera, so I can't quite see. Other faces are a little bit bigger. Are you following, KT?
Yeah, I'll have to go over it again, but it's fascinating and yeah, a lot to think about.
Yeah, yeah, especially Diana's mention in the break there of the books in the Mind Life series with the Dalai Lama and the work of Richie Davidson, University of Wisconsin. Okay, so let's continue. So this is how we should proceed. This is how we should proceed is stated clearly in Chandrakirti's clear words, or the clearly worded, the Prasanapada. So remember, what is that? That's some word commentary to fundamental wisdom that Chandrakirti wrote. His meaning commentary to fundamental wisdom is the Madhyamakavatara. So this quotation, the classification of valid cognition is due to the objects of cognition. And it is through finding their own characters, through simply assuming the aspects of their objects of cognition, that valid cognitions are defined. So that's not very clear. So that same quotation is translated in Jose's book on page 351. I think that was part of the PDF, wasn't it? I can't remember. He says, because the he's translating this verse from, or this sentence from the Prasanapada, because the determination of the number of valid cognitions. So Jimpa says the classification, so that in Tibetan we say namdang, usually that means the number. So he says, because the determination of the number of valid cognitions, being two, right? That there's direct perceptions and inferential cognitions that are valid. Any other way of knowing is not valid. So you shouldn't be confused here, because quite soon we're going to be talking about Prajnanika accepting 4 pramana, 4 kinds of valid cognition. Is that in contradiction to this, John? Here it says there's only 2 kinds of valid cognition. What about the 4 kinds of valid cognition? Paul, what do you think?
I think if I remember correctly, Chandrakirti refutes 2 kinds of valid cognition, because he says that they presume that the object and the subject are inherently existent, and whereas one, you can't have one without the other. And then he goes on and argues for the 4 forms just provisionally, if I remember correctly, something like that, where he basically, this is part of his refutation of Dignaga and Dharmakirti.
So the point I'm trying to make here is that the of the 4 kinds of pramana, if you talk about that, what do you call it? That classification. So we have prataksha, that would be valid cognition, knowing an evident object.
Direct perception, yeah.
then inferential cognition, jipak,
Mhm.
and then pramana that depends on, people often translate it as testimony or
Scriptural authority or
scriptural
something like
authority or something like that, right? What is that in Sanskrit, you know?
It's agama.
that. Yeah.
Shabda, right? Of the,
Usually agama, I think.
yeah, that's what scriptural authority would be. But in the Naya the logic schools of India, that was called Shabda. So that meant sort of like that which is presented by words or concepts and so forth. And the fourth one was by analogy, right, or likeness. So those final two those are actually included in inferential cognizers. So that's why there's no contradiction that they would still be there. So Jose said, because the determination of the number of valid cognitions depends on the perceived objects that those valid cognitions apprehend, and because the nature of the two valid cognitions, these direct perception and inferential cognition, is posited in such a way that it corresponds to the nature of the kinds of perceived objects. So in this regard, if you are a Dharma geek and you say, well, hey, but Anne MacDonald translated the first chapter of the Prasanapada, why aren't you quoting her? So if you have her translation, some of you do, right? Paul, you have that, yeah. So on page 282, this is the case here. And so the way that Anne MacDonald's translated sounds a little more complicated, but it gets down to the same thing. She says, but here, in the case of prataksha, the direct perception, when you, with a view to asserting definitions for the means of valid cognition, when you maintain that only consciousness devoid of conceptuality is prataksha, is direct perception, then because of that sort of consciousness, because that sort of consciousness is admitted by you to be different exclusively from conceptual consciousness, we do not see any point in there being a designation in terms of the specific cause. Okay, so what I've read there is a sort of preface to the actual quotation, just to give some context there. She says, and given that the occurrence as regards to the number of means of valid cognition, this is the quotation, is dependent on the objects cognized, that is the pramyeya, and because there is the establishing of the own form, svarupa, of the two means of valid cognition, whose individual existence has been reached through nothing but conformity to the specific form of the respective object cognized. Okay, so that's quite complicated. But if you like to, that's on page 282 of Anne MacDonald's translation of the Prasanapada. Okay, so what is basically saying here is
which volume? There's two volumes to that.
I think it's the first volume, isn't it? Or is it the second volume? The first volume is just the Sanskrit, I think, right? What exists. And maybe some reconstruction of the Tibetan, but not much. Okay, so Thupten Jinpa's translation here continues of Lama Tsongkhapa. So Lama Tsongkhapa is going to try to sort of expand on this, sort of clarify what this statement in the Prasanapada means. The meaning of these sentences, these statements, is this. The classification of valid cognition into two, the two being direct perceptions and inference, is determined by the fact that objects of cognition are determined to be twofold. There are evident objects that you can perceive directly, and there are objects that are hidden that you know initially through inference. Like, say, for instance, the existence of fire in that burning pit over there. During the daytime, you can't see the flames. They're below the level of the lip of the fire pit, but you see the smoke, so you can infer them. So it's hidden to you initially. It's not considered a hidden object in general, but can be provisionally hidden. And it is on the basis of how the aspect of an object appears to valid cognition that a valid cognition comes to be defined as possessing its own character. How the aspect,
Cognize.
I'm sorry, it is, I'll just read it again. And it is on the basis of how the aspect of an object appears to valid cognition that a valid cognition comes to be defined, a valid cognizer comes to be defined as possessing its own character. So how that aspect of the object appears to valid cognition. So how does the aspect appear to direct perception? Through a replica of it being, or an image of it being projected on the sense organ, on the retina, and from the Buddhist perspective, on the subtle matter there. The significance of the exclusion term simply, or Tibetan sam. So in that phrase above, where did it say it's simply? Yeah, and it is through in the quotation from the Prasanapada. It said, and it is through finding their own characters, through simply assuming the aspect of their objects of cognition, that valid cognitions are defined. So simply, or sam, merely, the significance of this term, and he's using the word exclusion term, exclusionary term, so that's it's specifying something, excluding other things. The significance of the exclusion term simply is to reject the following assertion of the Sautrantika and Chittamatra, that assertion being valid cognition resembles and assumes the aspect of the object, and the object comes to be established through this, while valid cognition itself is established by a separate cognition. Valid cognition resembles and assumes the aspect of the object, and the object comes to be established through this, while valid cognition itself is established by a separate cognition. So this is what the Sautrantikas following the Sautrantikas that accept wrong Rick and the Chittamatrans would say, a bare or isolated subjective aspect that is free from dualistic perception with respect to the valid cognition itself. That is to say, it is established by reflexive awareness. This is what the exclusion term simply precludes. In other words, Chandrakirti is saying you don't need reflexive awareness. Cognition is established through the mere establishment of its object. That's what we've been saying by although it doesn't take place at the time that you establish the object. You establish the blue flower, or you prove the blue flower's existence by the perception of blue. And at the same time, the cognition of blue, the knowing of blue, is established through the mere establishment of its object. Okay, we following? Richard, you're a good gauge. You don't look completely happy. You don't look perplexed. It's making some sense.
I'm not perplexed. It sort of makes sense to me. I understand the general point that Chandra is making.
Excellent. Okay. So the text continues in Jimba's translation. Oh, let me see. I think there was some comment here. Yeah. It's just the FPMT translation is just a little bit different. Maybe if you read that, it might give a little more clarity if you find some problem with Jimpa's translation there. So the text continues in Jimpa's translation. This is also the intention of the Arya Nagarjuna himself. Jimpa translates the noble Arya Nagarjuna. So sometimes Nagarjuna is referred just as the Arya, the noble, or like we talk about the Arya truths, the noble truths, the truths for an Arya being, right? So, and this is in relationship to a quotation from, what is it called? The Averting Objections, which is one of the texts by Nagarjuna. What is that? Here it has the Sanskrit. What is the Tibetan of averting objections? Do you know?
Sodok, I think.
Sodok. So here it says, this quotation, if valid cognition is established by itself, so this is Nagarjuna writing in his text, averting objections. So it's most of the objections are about the Chittamatra school or about Alaya Vijnana and Rangrik and so forth. If valid cognition is established by itself, then for you, the means of valid cognition will be established independently of the objects of valid cognition. Because self-established does not depend on others. This is really dense, right? What does that mean? Right? So let's first read what Venerable Jones said here. How did she translate that? I'm not sure I have her. I just have what Jan Westerhoff has. So I'm going to use Jan Westerhoff's translation of this. So Jan Westerhoff, as we've mentioned before, has written a couple of texts on Madhyamaka and Prasangika, and I highly recommend them. I mentioned him before. I remember asking Paul, do you remember Jan from the Translators Conference in Sarnath many years ago? So he wrote a translation of this and also a commentary on it. So from Jan Westerhoff's Nagarjuna's Vigraha Vya Vartani by Jan Westerhoff. So you can find that on Amazon and so forth. So this is on pages 80 and 81 of that. And as a prelude, he's talking about the outline in that text says, the epistemic instruments as self-established. So I'm going to ask Richard, what does epistemic instruments mean? You've been listening to Jay Garfield's talks. He uses epistemic quite a bit, but he calls them epistemic what?
He does call them epistemic instruments, and I think, doesn't he mean pramana? Isn't that what he meant?
I thought Jay was using epistemic warrants.
Epistemic warrants, right? But
so that to me that means nothing. Epistemic, even epistemic instruments means something. So epistemic means relating to pramana, right? To epistemology, how we know things. So the instrument of that would be the consciousness that's knowing. That's the rikche, that is the knower. So and they're the epistemic warrants that Jay was talking about. And what are the objects? What did he call? the epistemic objects, or did he have a different term for that?
I don't remember. The warrants would kind of throw me out because I kept on thinking of warrants of arrest. So
Right.
I had trouble with that word.
Right. So you have to, that's a philosophical term that, so Jay is speaking to people who love philosophy and they follow that. So it basically is saying, here the way that Jan Westerhoff is translating says, this outline is the epistemic instruments as self-established. So that means refuting the Chittamatra view that the consciousness that's knowing is truly existent, self-established. So verse 40 there says, if the epistemic instruments are self-established, is this coming out of nowhere? So this is that verse. So the Jimpa translates, if valid cognition is established by itself, then for you, the means of valid cognition will be established. So this is translating the same verse. This is verse 40 in Jan's translation. He says, if the epistemic instruments, the valid cognitions, are self-established, the epistemic objects, so the instruments are the subjective minds, and the objects are what it's knowing, right? If the epistemic instruments are self-established, the epistemic objects will be independent of the establishment of the epistemic instruments for you. Because self-establishment is not dependent on anything else. So if something is self-established, what is that? If something is self-established, it is not dependent on anything else. Okay, so then he gives some commentary to that. He says, if you think the epistemic instruments are self-established like fire, he has that in quotation, self-established like fire, the establishment of the epistemic instruments will also be independent of the objects to be known. Why? Because what is self-established does not depend on anything else. Remember when we talk about truly existence phenomena, inherently existent phenomena, one of the characteristics that they would have if they existed would be that they would be independent of anything else. They would never be able to change. They wouldn't be able to affect anything. Moreover, what is dependent is not self-established, because if it were self-established, it couldn't depend on anything else. So if something is dependent, it is not self-established. If the epistemic instruments, the consciousnesses that are knowing, the pramanas that are knowing, establish their own veridicality, means their truth. They do not require any
veridicality, George. Veridicality.
Oh, you have the text in front of you? Good. You can help me here. Veridicality. If the epistemic instruments establish their own veridicality, so that means if the pramanas that are knowing something establish their own truth just by themselves, they do not require any other entities to do this for them. In particular, they do not need to be established by the epistemic objects. And I'm going to leave that there. If you have a chance to read that text, I will provide this on Monday for those who would like to see this section from Jan Westerhoff, where he explains that in more detail. So let's see what Lama Tsongkhapa says in this regard. Let me just make sure there's no other comment there. Okay, yeah. So Lama Tsongkhapa is going to now comment on this verse from averting objections. If the simple establishing of the object is not adequate to establish the valid cognition, so the valid cognition or the epistemic instrument, right, the pramana, the Prasangika position is that it is established. What does that mean? Phenomena have to be established to be objects of knowledge, right? If the simple establishing of the object, knowing the object and establishing its existence is not adequate to establish the valid cognition itself, and if valid cognition is established by itself as claimed by the opponent, then a valid cognition can exist without depending on its object of cognition. Is that right? What does that mean? Were this admitted, things could exist without needing to depend on other causes and conditions. Okay, we'll have to unravel that, unpack that. This is how Nagarjuna refutes self-establishment, and implicatively, by way of implication, he also reveals how the mere establishing of the object of cognition establishes the valid cognition as well. Merely establishing the object of cognition establishes the valid cognition as well. In brief, Nagarjuna presents how the blue perceiving cognition is not established by itself through reflexive awareness, as asserted by the Chittamantras, as others, for instance. Rather, as he demonstrates, it's established by valid sensory perception, for its presence is known simply through the blue perceiving cognition establishing its own object. So this is continuing on the same thread that from the Prasangika point of view, you can have a memory of perceiving something without the need of having a self-knower at the time that you perceive that object, and at the time that there was the perception of the blue. Therefore, all valid cognitions are established simply through the establishment of their objects. This is the Prasangika position. So in this regard, Jose also has, I think this is in the PDF, on page 353 of the PDF. Were it, as others believe, were it the case that, as the Chittamatrans believe, and the Sautrantikas believe, that a valid cognition is established by a valid cognition without allowing that a valid cognition be established simply by the establishment of its perceived object, then when a valid cognition could be established independently, then a valid cognition could be established independently of its perceived object. Okay, so complicated points here. So I'll just read a little bit further where he, in that page, that's part of the PDF, is it not?
Yeah.
Page 353, yeah. So if it is asserted, if that is asserted, things would be thoroughly established without depending on their other causes and conditions. This is how Nagarjuna refutes self-establishment. Indirectly, so this is similar to what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, but this is from the words of Kedrubche in The Dose of Emptiness. Indirectly, he teaches that valid cognizers are established by merely establishing their objects of comprehension, by establishing, let's say, the blue of the flower and so forth. In brief, Nagarjuna presents that an apprehender of blue is not established by a self-cognizer as it is in other systems. Nagarjuna presents that an apprehender of blue is not proved by a self-cognizer as it is in the other systems. Instead, he indicates it to be established by a sense-direct valid cognizer because its existence is realized through the very establishment of the object of comprehension by an apprehender of blue. Therefore, all valid cognizers whatsoever are established by establishing their objects of comprehension. Okay. Woo. So if we had not had some preparation before, you make me completely think that's total gibberish, just whole bunch of words packed together. But those of you who could say, "Oh yeah, I think I understand what you're saying," it's because we've gone over this in preparation beforehand. Okay, let me just see. Was there something else there? Okay. So you have that, and also note in the chat if you want. Doris has posted. What is this? Okay, so this is Jan Westerhoff's translation of the Dispeller of Disputes. So if you go to verse 40, you'll be able to see in detail there. You'll have it. I don't need to provide that later to you. So you have that right now. Make sure you download that. Okay, so just let me read this next section a little. This is where we're going to end. We're just getting our ending time. So the next section is rebutting objections concerning other mental cognitions. Yeah. In the Tibetan, it just says nipa, nipa, ni. It just means the second. So you have to remember this outline from before. So the commentary says, in this Chandrakirti system, in this Prasangika system as it's elucidated by Chandrakirti, things like mirror images and echoes are, as explained previously, explained above, accepted as visible forms, hearable sounds, and so forth. So remember, we talked about this earlier. Those of you who've been with us for a couple of classes, usually a mirror image that is an actual a visible form from the point of view of Prasangika. It doesn't sound like a stretch, but echoes and so forth are also explained as accepted as actual sounds and so on. Furthermore, the clearly worded, the prasanapada, the clear words say, as for a double moon and so on. Remember, that's the kind of thing, the occurrence can take place if something is irritating your eye, if you're crunching your eye or something like that. A double moon and so on. Such things are not direct perceptions from the perspective of cognitions not affected by an eye disease. And maybe you can see double moon because of the moon seems to be two because you have an eye disease, or just pressing your finger on your eye in a certain way, sort of affected by some outside cause. However, from the perspective of someone whose sight is infected, whose sight is affected, they are direct perception alone. Oh, so those objects are actually prataksha. Those are evident objects, even though they, from the point of view of someone who is not affected by that cause of error, they don't exist. To the person who is affected by that, they are evident objects. They are perceived by direct perception. So I'm just going to read a little bit further because you will be able to follow in Jose's exposition and the PDF that was earlier we read from. It's similar. So Thupten Jinpa translates, so this school of thought, the Prasangika, applies the term direct perception, pratyaksha. Well, it's kind of, it just says there's ngunsum in Tibetan, right? To this school of thought that applies the term pratyaksha to objects such as forms and sounds in actual terms, it does apply that. So that means that from the Prasangika point of view, what we generally call valid cognitions, with this term in Sanskrit pratyaksha or in Tibetan ngunsum, right? Direct perception. Usually we translate that as being the cognizer, right? Actually, it's applied from the Prasangika point of view, its primary meaning is the object itself, an evident object. Pratyaksha can mean evident object or manifest object. And it's only incidentally then referred back to the cognizer of that evident object, let's say the direct perception, that we call them pratyaksha or ngunsum or direct perception. So this school of thought applies the term pratyaksha to objects such as forms and sounds in actual terms, and figuratively, indirectly, to the subject that apprehends such objects. Is that making sense so far? What do you think? I said, yeah, I was looking down, so you don't want me to. So, Jeremy, is that making sense? I'm teasing.
No, not really, George.
Okay,
Sorry.
so so that's good. So, from the Prasangika point of view, the term that we usually translate as direct perceiver, in Tibetan we say ngunsum, a direct perceiver, like an eye consciousness, directly perceives something, a manifest object. From the Prasangika point of view, that word pratyaksha or ngunsum actually refers to the object that is evident. That is the actual meaning of pratyaksha from the Prasangika point of view. And only indirectly then it can be applied to the perception itself that knows the evident object or the manifest object. So this school of thought applies the term direct pratyaksha to objects such as forms and sounds in actual terms, and figuratively, indirectly, to the subject that apprehends such objects. In doing so, Chandrakirti explains how, although a distinction may be made from the perspective of ordinary worldly people as to whether things like the appearance of a double moon are objects of direct perception, as the world would say, a double moon is not an object of direct perception. Come on, that's because of some error. That's not a direct perception. In our system, however, even the appearance of a double moon is an evident object, a pratyaksha, of direct perception, pratyaksha. So the word pratyaksha or ngunsum refers both to the object, the evident object, and to the perceiver of that, but it mainly refers to the object. So this is one of the uncommon points of the Prasangika, that the word pratyaksha refers to the object rather than, primarily, rather than the perceiver of that we usually think. Therefore, regardless of whether such sensory cognitions are diluted by standards of ordinary worldly convention, the subject, the cognition itself, is established simply through the existence of its object. Okay, so that's where we're going to begin again next time. How are we doing? Yeah, Mikhail.
So is this discussion trying to support the preceding idea that the memory of I perceived blue is established by just the memory of the blue, that they go together.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's following on that same thread. How we doing? Okay. Jennifer, you look, I'm not sure that particular position, that means something?
There were a couple of questions that arose, but maybe I can ask next time. But thank you.
Okay, is there one prominent that's more?
I'm thanks. I'm just trying to get my head around prataksha versus valid direct perception. So basically, because I thought a valid perception was also incorporated the faultiness or non-faultiness of the
Okay, so here the word,
perceiver.
here the valid part is not there. It's just talking about
Okay.
direct perception. So when we talk about direct perceptions, we can talk about valid direct perceptions.
Okay.
And from the present
Okay.
point of view, there can be direct perceptions that are not valid. So they're not pramana.
Okay.
Okay.
Such as,
Oh, sorry. No, go, Louise. Yeah, I think we're thinking the same thing.
oh, I'm thinking of someone with dementia where they have direct perceptions that don't accord with because their brain is breaking down. Why, for whatever reason, but they'll see reality that's not there. You see something that the rest, like the eye disease you use, I'll use dementia as that. So
Okay.
it's not valid
Okay.
perception.
So
that's
where we're going to begin next time. Any last question before we dedicate our virtues? So very important at the beginning. I noticed during Jay's presentations for philosophers that just finished, very good. If you have a chance to watch, it meshes very much with what we've been talking about. There's some other things there that he presented that I found some issues with that I'll mention in discussion on Monday. But he just mentions at the beginning, it's important to have motivation, but from the Buddhist perspective of, when the lamas and the gurus teach and so forth, we always recite the refuge and generation of bodhicitta 3 times in a formal way, and we try to solidify that. If you've already actualized those things, Jay's presentation is fine. Just to say, remember your motivation. But also at the end, after having done some action motivated at the beginning by bodhicitta, it's important to dedicate the merits and the virtues, that is, the collection of merit and the collection of wisdom. So, due to these virtues, we're making a sort of a dedication. So we're trying to connect the virtues that we created with our intended cause. It's kind of like a prayer, a strong wish. Due to these virtues, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha. May I quickly become a Guru Buddha. And as a result, lead all migrators without exception into that very same state. And then the prayer from the prayer of Maitreya, may the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not yet arisen arise and grow in my mind and in the mind of others as a result of these virtues. And may that which has arisen already in my mind and the mind of others not diminish, may it not degenerate, but as a result of these merits, may it increase more and more. And for the quick return of Lama Sopa Rinpoche, Khapa Lama Sopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, that means the Bodhisattvas, Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas, victorious Losang Drakpa, Lama Tsongkhapa, who is the spiritual father to Kedrup Je and Gyaltsab Je, his spiritual sons, together with your Gelugpa lineage as well as all objects of refuge of the infinite realms, please bestow upon us here and now the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In upholding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, his part of Lama Zopa's name in it, Tup 10, through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience, which is Sopa, that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, I make requests. You who are the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of both the victorious one's teachings, the Buddhist teachings, the welfare of that, and for the welfare of mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace, at which point I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truths of the oceanic blessings of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta, of the bodhisattvas, by those truths, the power of the truth, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for us fortunate disciples. So I don't know, maybe the reincarnation of Lama Zopa Rinpoche has already been identified, and it's still secret, but I haven't heard anything to that effect. But we're praying that we'll be able to see his face soon. And then finally, for all of our gurus, present, past, future, primordial gurus, you who are my eyes for seeing all the infinite scriptures, supreme gateways for the fortunate ones traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means moved by mercy, illuminating spiritual friends, I make this request. Please live long and stable lives. Okay, so yeah, lots of unprecedented events happening in the world. We get a chance to see Doris. Hi, Doris. Yeah, so try to practice the mind training. I look forward to seeing some of you on Monday. Maybe all of you, who knows? Maybe you'll be surprised. And if not, certainly next Saturday. Take care.
Thank you, Venerable George.
Thank you.
And don't get too overwrought with the Super Bowl tomorrow. I don't know. I think maybe Don and I will be the only ones watching. Don, do you watch the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I'll probably.
Yeah, but maybe we're the only ones who will watch. I'm not sure.
You're going to watch the Turning Point USA halftime highlights instead of Bad Bunny?
Bad Bunny. Oops.
That is to be determined. Okay, take care. See you soon.